25 years of Resident Evil. Here are 25 best moments from the entire franchise. The first Resident Evil debuted on the PS1 in 1996, kickstarting an entirely new genre of horror and action. Throughout its many sequels, prequels, and spin-offs, not to mention remakes and ports, Resident Evil has had its share of middling failures and overwhelming successes. However, the sheer number of awesome moments it's provided have been worth the chaotic journey. So let's take a look at 25 of the best moments from the entire franchise, though be warned that spoilers are abound for pretty much every game. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first zombie, Resident Evil 1998. For many fans, it all started here. Even with its hilariously bad voice acting and cheesy characters, the encounter with the very first zombie was perfect. Jill or Chris enters and sees a perp hunched over a corpse as chewing sounds can be heard. As it notices their presence, a decapitated half-chewed head falls to the ground, and it slowly turns around. It may not be the sharpest cutscene by today's standards, but the look in its eyes would herald the horror to come for decades. Nemesis arrives. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Despite having so many first interactions with bioweapons already, Capcom managed to one-up themselves with the debut of the Nemesis. As Jill Valentine runs to take refuge in the Raccoon City Police Department, a heavily injured Brad Vickers appears. Before he can be helped, the giant Nemesis drops down in front of him, picking him up and impales him through the head. It then casually says "stars" before targeting Jill next and beginning a near-endless game of cat and mouse. Brad's death. Resident Evil 3 2020. Though Brad's gruesome death at the hands of Nemesis was changed, it's arguably handled better in the remake. Upon meeting Jill, the two take refuge in a nearby building from the oncoming zombie horde. Brad is bitten but holds the door to buy time for Jill to escape. Sadly, it doesn't end there. Later, while playing as Carlos, we see Marvin from Resident Evil 2 getting ready to kill the infected Brad, but stopping when the latter seemingly speaks. Marvin is subsequently bitten and escapes, while Brad goes full undead, leaving Carlos to dispose of him. Jill Sandwich, Resident Evil 1998.
Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
While Resident Evil 1's voice acting was questionable at best, its script writing was top tier, and read that as so bad it was so good. Leave it to Barry Burton, Jill's ally, to have all of the best lines. Upon rescuing Jill from a trap room with a falling ceiling, Barry remarks, quote, "That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich," while seemingly holding back the urge to laugh. Though it would be rewritten to sound less dorky in the remake, the fact that this line would be referenced for years, most notably in Resident Evil Revelations 2, is proof of its legendary status. Mr. X appears. Resident Evil 2 2019. Its appearance in the original game was done well, capturing that foreboding atmosphere one would expect from a Resident Evil title. In the remake, however, Mr. X stole the show. As the player walks down a hallway with a crashed helicopter blocking their way, it's suddenly lifted up by the trenchcoat-wearing behemoth. The numerous appearances it made after that, walking determinedly down hallways, punching everything out of its way, and checking its head if you shot its hat off, were great, but its very first appearance, that's still the best. Hunters on the Prowl, Resident Evil 2002. In contrast to the zombies in Spencer Mansion, the hunters were quick, agile, and incredibly vicious. Their introduction was also handled well, especially in the remake, with a first-person cutscene of the hunters leaping up passages and traveling through corridors as one wondered just what could be moving so fast. While dispatched easily enough with 2 shotgun shells, their relative abundance and killer leaps made each encounter a harrowing one. Jill's final words to Nemesis, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. These lines might not have had the same panache and flair in the remake, especially in the situation that Jill said it, but they were perfectly executed in the original. After hours of being chased by the Nemesis and finally seeing it on the brink of death, Jill says, quote,
"You want stars? I'll give you stars."
You want stars? I'll give you stars, before firing one last shot. The Nemesis was thus defeated and not totally ruined years later in Resident Evil Apocalypse. Not at all. QTE Knives Out, Resident Evil 4. Before fighting Krauser in a proper boss fight, Leon had to engage in a knife fight with him. The measured pace quickly gives way to numerous QTE button presses as the two attempt to slice each other up. Every failed sequence would be fatal for Leon, especially if you played on PC with its lack of proper keyboard prompts, resulting in a tense dance of death. First fight with Jack Baker, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The patriarch of the Baker family is an overwhelming presence throughout the game, yet his first proper boss fight is something else entirely. From casually annihilating a police officer with a shovel to being run over several times, then lit on fire before getting caught in an explosion to shooting himself in the head with Ethan's gun. This was the moment when RE7 went fully off the rails into something wonderful. And to think that this is before the chainsaw duel with Jack later. Redfield returns, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Of all the characters we expected at the end of Resident Evil 7, Chris Redfield was probably near the bottom. Why had the poster boy for STARS and the BSAA suddenly joined Umbrella? Fortunately, it was revealed in the Not a Hero DLC that this was actually a private military company created by Umbrella's former employees, and that Chris was actually contracted by them. Intriguing lore aside, Chris's new appearance was also interesting, especially given his significant lack of musculature. Chris Smash, Resident Evil 5. Which is a shame because the highlight of Chris's career was punching a friggin' boulder with his bare hands. Some context first. In the final battle with the mutated Albert Wesker, Chris and Sheva were separated. The latter provides some covering fire for Chris, causing Wesker to leap over to her side. In order to rejoin his partner, Chris proceeds to move a not at all small boulder by both pushing and punching it to bridge the lava-filled chasm and help Sheva. While not quite the one-punch moment you'd think it would be, it's still hilarious. Nemesis needs floaties, Resident Evil 3 2020. Capcom made some questionable decisions with its many content changes and omissions to Resident Evil 3's core story, to say nothing of Resident Evil Resistance, which flopped almost immediately out of the gate. But there were some pretty great new scenes as well. Following the train's derailment and Nikolai's betrayal, Jill sees a random explosion and Nemesis on fire. It falls into the water, leading to her casually remarking, "Can't even swim." Of course, it emerges once again, mutated and angrier than ever, but this was still a great moment to highlight Jill's sheer badassery. Railgun Massacre, Resident Evil 3 2020. Another area where the remake excelled was in the final boss fight with Nemesis. Instead of just an indistinct blob, it was a proper, towering monstrosity, with Jill actually picking up and firing the massive railgun to kill it. The first shot isn't enough, and the player must maneuver around Nemesis's huge tendrils to charge up the next. Once this is done, the second shot brings it down, thus leading to Jill shoving the cannon into its mouth and firing one final shot, resulting in an explosion of blood and viscera. Licker's first appearance, Resident Evil 2. As players traveled through the RPD in the original Resident Evil 2, they discovered a corpse with its head missing. Ahead of it was a pool of blood, drops falling from the ceiling. Of course, this led to the first encounter with the Licker as it slowly crawled across, its hideous features fully revealed. Compared to the remake, where it simply rushed the player, the Licker's introduction here was more methodical, creating a feeling of slow dread. The Regenerator Rises, Resident Evil 4. The sheer number of cool moments in Resident Evil 4 cannot be understated. Case in point is the Regenerator's first appearance, where it suddenly saunters in after Leon collects the freezer card key. Shooting off its limbs and head did nothing, and just when you'd think shooting its legs off would buy you some time, it would start leaping and gnawing at you with little effort. Of course, the Iron Maiden, which emits spikes from its body with every shot, is even more grotesque. Final Battle, Resident Evil 1998 and 2002. The initial encounter with the Tyrant as it kills Wesker and escapes its tube in the lab is tense, but the final battle ramps things up even further. Seeing it effortlessly rush towards the player, whether it's in the original or the remake, and swipe them aside is absolutely terrifying, and the countdown timer didn't help matters either. All of this led to the classic trope of a rocket launcher being dropped for the player to wipe out the Tyrant once and for all. Minecart Ride, Resident Evil 4. Among the various ways that Resident Evil 4 mixed up its gameplay was the journey through the mines, with Leon battling several Ganado before hopping into some mine carts. From here, the experience became part rail shooter, as some foes could be shot and fall into the cart's path. Others could drop down successfully though, which meant repositioning to other carts for safety. You even had to duck beneath any wooden beams before making a death-defying leap to safety at the end. Skirmish in the Village, Resident Evil 5. Taking inspiration from Resident Evil 4's opening battle, Resident Evil 5 sees Chris and Sheva assaulted by hordes of Magini and an executioner in the early going. The duo must survive until their backup arrives, which leads to a lot of running across structures, blowing up enemies with barrels, and avoiding decapitation. While not quite as novel as RE4's opening, it did offer a frenetic pace of its own to draw players in. Evelyn's Reveal, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Each member of the Baker family had their share of, for lack of a better word, quirks, but Evelyn always seemed to be the strangest, disappearing and reappearing at random. It was only after Mia became playable that the truth was revealed. Evelyn was the cause of the Molded, the Baker family's infection, Mia's suffering, and the list goes on. Ethan eventually confronts her, injecting her with the E necrotoxin and causing her control over him to end, and eventually would be defeated with the help of the new Umbrella and Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine returns, Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 starts out with the assumption that Jill Valentine is dead, but it quickly becomes apparent that this may not be the case. Given the series' penchant for surprises, it was nice to see Jill actually alive. This was her first real appearance in a Resident Evil game since 1999's Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, even if she beat the absolute tar out of Chris. Wesker lives, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Of all the horrible things going on in Resident Evil Code Veronica, Albert Wesker suddenly revealing that he's alive was the biggest surprise. Wesker had injected himself with a special version of the T-virus before being killed by the Tyrant in the first game, and now had superpowers. While Alexia Ashford was the real threat in Code Veronica, Wesker would become a much bigger deal down the line, and it all started here. True Ending, Resident Evil 2 2019. Unlocked upon completing the game with Leon or Claire and choosing the second run option to play through as the other character, the true ending saw the duo and Sherry board the train to escape Raccoon City. Of course, the final mutated form of William Birkin appears and Leon fights him off as Claire proceeds to uncouple the car. Eventually, it all culminates in Birkin's fiery demise once Raccoon City is bombed. Overall, a great way to close out the title, even if Sherry seems way too upbeat after all the trauma that's taken place. Battle with Nosferatu, Resident Evil Code Veronica. First encountered by Claire Redfield in the Antarctic base, Nosferatu was revealed to be Alexander Ashford. Having used Veronica Ashford's DNA with a special gene to create Alexia and Alfred, the twins would experiment on him with the T Veronica virus as revenge and confine him to a secret room. Seeing him slowly make his way up the stairs through the mist to confront Claire and Steve before sprouting tendrils was disturbing, to say the very least. Pierre's death, Resident Evil 6. Let's be real, Resident Evil 6 didn't have a whole lot of great moments. Pierre's mutation at the end of Chris's campaign was neat but short-lived. Thankfully, it led to one of the few highlights. As the duo rushed to escape the underwater complex, Pierre threw Chris inside the escape pod and locked him in. Since he was already dead due to the mutation, he at least wanted his partner to survive. Even with the complex being destroyed, Pierre still had enough wherewithal to attack House before it could destroy Chris's pod, further clinching his status as best bro. Alex Wesker revealed, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Throughout the series, Albert Wesker served as a central antagonist with a hand in almost all of the terrible things that would happen. So when Barry and Natalia discovered a portrait of him in Resident Evil Revelations 2, it's assumed that Wesker had survived again and was back to his old tricks again. However, the Overseer finally revealed itself to be Alex Wesker, a product of Project W seeking to transfer her consciousness into Natalia. Though Alex's appearance was short-lived, it was a nice surprise that played into the past and present narrative of Revelations 2 pretty well. So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.